This is the last clip that will be covering the last few pages in your book. We're looking at genetic variation that we've been studying for most of the time and seeing how natural selection works on that variation to allow populations and species to adapt to changes in their environment. So natural selection leads to the adaptation of a population. It results from the genetic variation amongst all the individuals in a population, and we've talked about where that genetic variation comes from. And it means that some individuals may have features that are able to mean they can leave more offspring than others. So more of the next generation will carry those favourable alleles. So how does this actually work? Well, in the natural world, generally there are always more offspring produced than the environment can actually support. Not all these little saplings are going to go on to be big trees. Certainly most of these little mice won't survive to adulthood. They will catch diseases, they will be caught by predators, they will not have the wits to stay warm or make a nest and they'll die. Similarly, all these little alligators won't grow up to be adults. They will be picked off by predators or again get diseases and die. So always more offspring are made than are ever going to reach adulthood. Some of them will be selected for and they will go on and make the next generation. So what kind of things actually select those that survive? Well, it's things of nature. That's what natural selection means. It's any factor that can make it challenging to survive, and some individuals will be able to meet that challenge and others won't. This little guy here is a Tasmanian devil, and they're very worried about them in Australia at the moment because they're all dying from a dreadful infectious facial cancer. And Australian scientists are desperately hoping that they'll come upon some Tasmanian devils that have a natural immunity to the cancer. Otherwise the species will go extinct. This antelope down here obviously didn't possess the fast gene or the alert gene because it's been caught by the predator. So he's not going to be contributing his slow dopey genes to the next population, next generation. The tiger, of course, has managed to find food to help feed her young. So she will perhaps contribute her alleles to the next generation, her alleles of fastness, alertness, and the ability to bring down food. This little Chinese hairless crested dog had a mutation that meant he has virtually no body hair. Now people have taken these dogs and bred them into a breed, but of course out in the wild such a mutation would mean that they would never survive to breed. So here's our little polar bear thinking what I really need is a good fur coat, but of course it doesn't work like that. Natural selection leads to the adaptation of a population or a species over time, but the process doesn't involve effort or trying or wanting a particular feature. Either an individual has the genes that are good enough to survive and reproduce, or it doesn't. It can't get the right genes by trying or wishing. It results from the genetic variation in a population that's already there before the environment has offered the challenge. And the fact that some individuals may therefore be able to leave more offspring with their genes in the next generation than those other ones. Polar bears didn't get thick white fur because they needed thick white fur. There'll be genetically varied brown bears, varied in the thickness of their fur, and the occasional white mutation turned up, and those white thick-furred bears formed the founders of the polar bear population during an ice age. Bacteria are another example, though a bit of a simplistic example because they're not sexually reproducing, but they are a bit sloppy when they copy their DNA, so mutation is quite common. So they don't evolve resistance to our antibiotics because they try hard to do so. Oh my goodness, she's taken an antibiotic, I better develop some resistance. Doesn't work like that. Resistance evolves all the time because of random mutations that are happening. And when the patient takes the antibiotic, there will always be some individuals that through mutation are already able to survive that antibiotic. They reproduce more than the others, leaving behind a population that's more resistant than it was before. Here's an example looking at Helicobacter pylori, which is a bacteria that causes stomach ulcers. Here's our H. pylori population, and in amongst them there will be some mutant ones naturally before you've even taken your antibiotic. Those that produce this normal enzyme, when you take the antibiotic, that means they die, leaving the mutant ones to form the basis of the new population. It's similar with insects and pesticide resistance. Here are a whole lot of insect mites eating the leaf, and amongst all of those there'll be a few that happen to be resistant to the pesticide. Why? Because they've had a mutation in the gene that that codes the protein that the pesticide works on. When that pesticide is then applied, that genetically varied population, most of them will die and a few will survive. And those few that have survived can now go on and mate and reproduce, pass on the genetic basis for that resistance, and then make a fully pesticide resistant population. So here's another example, this time looking at some beetles and birds that particularly like to eat these beetles. They really like the green ones. There's the occasional little brown one there, mutant allele at a low frequency, but they like the green ones, so they hoe into the green beetles. So this is natural selection in a nutshell. There's a genetic variation in the beetles' traits. Some are green, some are brown. The different phenotypes, the green beetles and the brown beetles, have a differing success at reproduction. The green beetles tend to get eaten by the birds, so they don't survive quite so well. They don't reproduce as much as the brown beetles do. So that genetic advantage, that brown allele, gets passed down to the offspring. And because they're not being eaten by the birds, the surviving brown beetles have lots of brown baby beetles because there is a genetic basis to brownness. So the end result is the more advantageous or favourable trait, brown colour, which allows the beetles to survive being predated by the birds, means they have more offspring. It becomes more common in the population, and the population has adapted to being eaten by the green beetle-loving birds. As an extension idea, we would say the frequency of the brown allele has increased, and that's actually the definition of evolution. And evolution is simply a change in allele frequency. So the beetle population has evolved. But let's look at adaptation again. What if a different bird predator replaced the other one, and this bird predator preferred to eat brown beetles? We would see the same process happening, but this time it would be all the brown beetles that are being favoured and eaten up, and the occasional little green beetle would be surviving. And over time, it's the green beetles now that have the phenotype that help their survival. They would breed more, passing their green alleles on, and over time their numbers would increase. Brown beetles would become rarer as they would be eaten before they had a chance to reproduce. So now we could say that the beetle population has adapted to meet the challenge of the new bird predator, the one that likes brown beetles. A final example, hiding in amongst here are 3 frogs. Can you see them? All slightly different shades of dead leaf. They've got the alleles for dead leaf coloured skin. But if the makeup of the plants in the forest changed, a different phenotype would become more favourable. If you look really carefully here, there's a green frog lurking in the bushes. So if the allele for green is in that frog population, green frogs will then survive better and breed more. The frog population would have adapted to the change in the environment. But of course, if the allele for green is not within that frog population and no mutation occurs that produces green in frogs, the frog population may well go extinct under the pressure of predation.